Stealing my GF's Wi-Fi strained, or ended, their relationship. Hi gang. First, last time I posted here I made a doo-doo with my story, and comparing it with some of the other stories here I can only agree in hindsight. I know it means nothing on the scale of Reddit, but I'm sorry about that mishap and wanted to fix my mistake. Then my GF reminded me of this story today. Backstory: after my girlfriend moved to her new apartment closer to both her sister and myself, she obviously wanted internet. Although she isn't fully tech savvy, she does know her basics and thus explicitly asked the provider if she should be worried about admin/admin kind of Wi-Fi protection. She was assured that it was all fully safe out of the box, no admin/admin. In fact, just press a button to connect her laptop and her Wi-Fi network would be fully secured. The incident. So a few months or years later, my GF started to notice that her internet speed went down. This became very apparent while video chatting with some of her family members in Japan. Like I said, my GF knows her basics, so she knew that it didn't have to be the internet connection itself, it could also be her laptop, or maybe the network cables had eroded due to age. She decided to cover as many options as possible before contacting her ISP support desk, so she asked me to help. I'm a geek and I worked within the field of ICT for over 30 years now, mostly as systems administrator but also as IT manager or co-manager, during which I'd still try to keep tabs with my colleagues and even cover shifts if the need arose. So visiting my GF and getting to show of my elite IT skills? It took me a moment, but I discovered the issue: someone was leeching of her Wi-Fi. Technically the ISP support staff were right, this wasn't an admin/admin kind of thing anymore, it was completely randomized. Sorta. You see, on their routers the Wi-Fi password was the same as the random SSID, aka network name. What the F? I was quite angry at both this incompetence as well as the blatant disrespect for my GF's privacy, maybe a bit too much, but yeah. Sure, for some people this is only about getting internet, but what many people overlook is that such leeches also gain access to your private network, so basically they could also access any public Windows, or Mac, shares you may have active, not to mention any other connected devices. Fortunately my GF knew her basics, as I mentioned earlier, but I was still angry. The revenge. So I suggested something I had done earlier: let's replace this POS router for a professional device. In specific, the same kind of XL router that I used at my home, so that we could set up a secured VPN between ourselves and get some other nice feats as well, like a private VoIP connection. She agreed, so we bought her a new router together. We're talking professional gear here. These things cost about as much as a high-end smartphone, so obviously we were going to split the costs, considering that a mid-level could also have helped her out. Now, even though I consider her previous router a POS, I still have to admit that it did provide some very useful features, like a syslog service. It could also use USB storage, so I turned on Wi-Fi logging, plugged in a large USB memory stick, and then we waited for the new router to arrive. Then I got to work. First I set up my GF with a nice hidden Wi-Fi network so that no one could easily find it. Next we set up a much better security scheme, and then it was time to get even with the lowlifes. I set up a second Wi-Fi network which was completely the same as the previous one, but this time I throttled it down a bit so that it couldn't usurp the full bandwidth. Then I added some specific DNS overrides. DNS is a service on the internet which translates names into IP addresses, which is what your computer needs to connect to something. You may care about reddit.com, all your PC cares about are the associated IP addresses. Thing is, this service can be easily overridden. And I had studied the logs, so I knew exactly which sites the low-livs visited the most. So from now on, going to banker.nl using this router would point your browser to a hardcore, not very legal gay porn website. Not very legal as in, the site didn't bother asking for consent first but got you some close-up screenshots right away. Then it was time for bank.nl. I redirected that one to a shady hot scissors lesbian website. I also noticed that a certain webshop was sporadically used by the leeches, so I decided to redirect that one to a relationship counseling website. When you think your spouse is cheating on you, come to us. It was around that time when I noticed that my GF's router was using a more modern firmware than I had on my router. This one also provided web redirection services. Companies can use this to redirect specific websites based on their URL to a local, or remote, web page. So, say you don't want your staff to use social media, then you could just tell the router to redirect, say, facebook.com to a local web page which explained the no social media allowed policy. Much to my delight, this service also supported a randomizer trigger. See, I still remembered a website from the early days of the internet, something about a goat from Sweden which was so horrible that it became a meme on its own. Seriously, a look at that picture could never be undone anymore. There's a reason I still remember the horror now, an easy 30 years later. So, I looked for, and found, a replacement and then happily added that to a randomized redirection service. So every once in a while the leeches would open their favorite websites, and no matter whatever kind of site they asked for, they'd always end up with something completely and utterly disgusting on their screen. Then we waited. I need to point out that my girlfriend did not fully agree with some of my actions, especially when she learned of the aftermath. But we never had an argument over this because she could also understand my POF, don't mess with my GF, and she agrees that if you trespass, even in the digital world, then all bets are off and you lost your rights to a civil solution. Don't mess with a geek, okay? The aftermath. One day my GF got home from work and noticed a huge moving van outside. She gave it no further mind, but when she got to her front door she noticed that her neighbor 2 doors over was moving out. She brought this up with her direct in-between neighbor a few days later, and as it turns out things completely exploded over there. The shouting and accusations could even be heard through the walls. Seems the pair got into huge arguments about their rather explicit choice of websites, and once the deed was done there was no room left for any kind of reasoning. One of the two even accused the other for hacking the internet, because it was only after the first fallout that those goating pictures started to show up. As far we know they broke up.
For the record, I regret nothing. I did remove the SSID for obvious reasons and also reset the DNS and forwarding sections, and now things are back to normal. More importantly, my GF is still very happy with the router and the extra services to this very same day of writing. She's working her way up as a 3D artist, and the knowledge that all her work will be fully kept safe after she copies her projects onto my NAS is a deal breaker for her. Seriously, you guys, always remember that when you use someone else's internet connection, this includes free services, then you're fully relying on their goodwill. Such services could be easily abused as well, either through pranking like I did, or worse. How about I redirect your bank requests to a fake login page so that I can store and or abuse your data? Thanks for reading. Edit. Some points which people raised. This story didn't play out 30 years ago, at most 6. It was impossible for the couple to make an honest mistake. First, the Wi-Fi names, even default ones, would be far apart. ISP 151,413, ISP 201,413, ISP 251,413, and so on. Also, unlimited plans aren't common here, so one way or the other they'd have seen to be using zero data over the months this went on. Not to mention that their password would never have matched that of my GF's. Assuming, of course, they even had a subscription, or the same ISP. As for the DNS, not IDNs, no, they wouldn't get to see the URL of their bank showing a PR0N website, but at best an IP address. As for me not caring at all about the aftermath? How entitled, or unreasonable? Do you have to be to start accusing someone for opening up a website but then refusing to listen to further reason and instead start a major drama? If they had both opened the same website, like the online store, then it would be immediately clear as to what had happened. This also leads up to the honest mistake. If it were an honest mistake, then wouldn't one of them have called their ISP to try and prove their point of being not guilty? At the very least to complain about shoddy service? Instead they tore each other a new one. TLDR? GF had issues with her internet speed, should have been right according to ISP. I discovered Wi-Fi leechers, getting mad over that I decided to escalate. We bought GF a new router, I copied the old Wi-Fi network but with changes. 2 sites used by the leechers now led to hardcore PR0N websites, the last to a counseling website, for when your relationship hits a cliff. Several days later GF learned that some people were moving out on her apartment level. When asking her direct neighbor, it turned out that their direct neighbors had quite the fallout. And my stance is still the same: if you're leeching of someone else's internet connection, then the fallout is on you. I pranked them, hard, but still, I'm convinced others would have done a lot worse.
Hey. I love you. Thanks for watching. I hoped you enjoyed this Reddit audio story. It would mean a lot to me if you could like and subscribe, or better yet, leave a comment about one of the stories. Thanks, and I hope you have a wonderfully fantastic day. XOXO.